Welcome back to We're Not the Same. I'm Brian here with my beautiful wife, Katie. And today we're talking about a lot of different things.
Yes, a lot of current events and also a little message to just give you guys some hope and to help support you on this journey that we brought you on of waking up to a lot of different things, opening your eyes, and how to just continue to live a happy life despite all of those things. So let's dive in. All right, so we are back. Took a little break last week because of my birthday.
That's right.
That's not really why we took a break, but it just so happened that it
We're
was
gonna
my
use
birthday.
It as an excuse for sure.
So this week we wanted to talk about several topics, but the main one just being kind of looking back over all of the topics that we've covered thus far on the podcast and the topic of just waking up and, you know, in terms of seeing the world for what it is and the corruption, the evil, and how that can just really get you down and what you can do about that to, you know, still find the good in life and the joy and happiness because life is still good. And I think everybody kind of goes through, I've seen it personally with friends going through the waking up process, and it's very dark and very astonishing. Like, how could it possibly be this bad? How could it possibly be true? But I think once you kind of like come out of the tunnel, like
into the light
and realize just how much we really do need Jesus and trust in God and faith in God.
It's good. And I think that's why some things happen and we get pushed through, is to find ourselves back with Jesus, which is where we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of good that comes from having gone through and waking up to the evils of the world.
Yeah. And, you know, they talk in the Bible of like the scales falling from your eyes and different, you know, analogies used, and it's just very true. You know, it really feels like you see things through a new lens. You know, none of us will ever know why things happen for sure. Like, we can obviously speculate, but part of me has to believe that the reason all this COVID stuff happened was not that, you know, evil was winning in that time and God was blindsided. He allowed it to happen so that many of us could experience waking up and seeing things for what they really are and to turn the tide. So I know we talked before about the end times and believing that we are in the end times, which, you know, I don't know where I stand on it anymore.
Go back and forth.
I was convinced, and then, you know, you just read the Bible and all the times that things were really dark and bad things happened, and, you know, that wasn't the end. That wasn't Jesus's even first coming. So
things rise and fall all the time.
Yep. We don't know. We have to just stay prepared at all times, but also live our lives as if it's not the end times too, you know, and try to enjoy and just realize. And you kind of have to decide. I think we're in a time in history where, you know, you really have to make the decision of, are you going to trust in Jesus and believe fully, put your faith as your number one thing in your life, you know, because there's a lot of times, I mean, already, even with the jab, that was an example of like, when push comes to shove, where are you going to stand? Are you going to give in, or are you going to stand firmly? And I don't think people realize the religious, you know, impact of that, and they're blindly getting something that they morally should be against and are against. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the biggest reasons that the abortion industry stays as strong as it does, because they need those babies for their like science experiments. That's what we saw. We saw the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in theaters, like our first movie that we saw in like five or more
6 years.
Yeah. And it's just like it was like a little horrifying, you know, the way that they were showing these experiments on animals and stuff. And they're not doing that on live humans, but they are doing that on humans that were killed and sucked out of their mother's wombs. So it's really sad. And anyways, the point is, you need to decide where you're going to stand, and are you going to put, things that seem like they matter, like your job. Nobody wanted to lose their job, but some people got jobs to keep their job and ended up losing their life. So was that really worth it, and weighing those risks and where you stand on things.
So I think we also wanted to talk today about some more current events kind of related to the continued evils or the things that are waking up in this world, or the things that are going on that you may have heard of or you may not have heard of.
So everyone was abuzz for a while there with, we need to boycott Target. And we touched on that in our Assumptions About Us video and where we stand on that whole thing. But what we wanted to talk about today is the root of that. The root of why every company is going quote unquote woke despite the outcry of the people. And so there are many videos on this that you can look up that will probably explain it better and more in depth than we're going to, but we just want to introduce you to this in case you haven't heard of it, so that you can understand why a lot of things are happening when it doesn't make sense. Like, companies are losing millions and billions of dollars, and yet then you'll still see the next company line up to promote agendas that, people don't want.
Yep.
So it all comes down to this thing called the ESG score, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance score. And then there's also this thing called the CEI score, which is related in that. And it's actually has to do with investments and financials and how companies are getting financial support.
Well, the root of all evil is money, is what they say. So, right. And then there's a good portion of that is true. And you have to think about, there's a difference between what we call retail investors, which is like you and I investing in stocks. And we make up a good portion of the market. But the bigger portions of the market are your insurance firms, your pension funds, all of your hedge funds, like these big companies that control a lot of money. And they had to come up with a way to guide these companies are trying to promote and get money. And one of these things that they developed was the ESG score. And again, like many things, this started, or at least was proposed as this idea of wanting to invest in companies that had a focus on reducing their environmental footprint, not producing, high carbon things, social impacts of like caring about people and humanity and meeting certain thresholds related to social progress and things like that. So and it's still talked about as like, if you don't do this, you're a bad company. But they needed a way to score different companies to measure against these things. The problem is, unlike the credit ratings, so just like we have credit scores, companies have credit ratings. AAA, AA, you've probably heard about that if you know anything about 2008 and all the different bonds and the ratings. So basically, but that is regulated, highly regulated. Now you can argue it's by the SEC and all that, and if that's corrupt, but there's a set regulation around how you get those credit ratings, and you get money based off of your credit rating. Just like us, if you have a higher credit rating, you can get a low interest rate, you're more likely to get more money for loans. Now this ESG is replacing that, or in, side by side with that, but it's unregulated. So there's multiple different companies that go in and come up with the ESG score for companies. And there is one that has taken over most of the scoring. And you have to, in order to get your score, you have to pay for the data from them. And they get 40 cents on the dollar for that data transfer. Just like you actually have to pay for market data. So like, when you're a broker or when you trade stocks, there's data that has to go back and forth about the price and all of that. And market makers make money. It's a small little commission for providing price and value, just like the information. So in the same way, to get this score and the information of these companies, they have to pay for it because they want the score, because that helps them get more loans and better prices and interest rates and things like that. But they have to pay for the data, and this company that is does most of them, gets 40 cents on the dollar. So and it's a multi-billion-dollar company now that does these ratings for companies. So you can tell there's already tons wrong with that.
Well, and it also comes back to how are you deciding what is good, in terms of environmental, social, corporate governance, like who is saying, oh, well, this is good. And so that is basically goes back to who created the ESG in the first place, which is BlackRock, which you may or may not have heard of. I think more and more people are starting to know what BlackRock and Vanguard and all those are. These people are the people when people say, oh, they, or like who's running the world. I mean, these are some of the top people running the world. Like how many billions of dollars is BlackRock
has about $10 trillion worth of assets under management.
So if you look up any major company, Target, Disney, probably Anheuser-Busch, all of those, like one of their largest investor is probably BlackRock. And so how are they able to just come in and say, put the hammer down, like we're having this ESG score now, whether the companies agree on it or not? That's how, because they're the biggest player in every game. And so they just control everything. And so that's why even with all of us standing up and saying, no, it's making an impact, but it's a drop in the bucket, for these companies to where, you can look up the World Economic Forum, Agenda 2030. That's what they're pushing towards. That's what they want. And so, how does that tie in with the, it's basically the pride agenda and the push of all transgenderism and all those things. And it's all goes back to chipping away at American values, chipping away at the nuclear family, using these things to weaken us as a society as a whole so that the government and these powers that be can come in and they can take over the control and then force us to do whatever it is they want us to do, just like they're forcing companies. So
exactly. It's control of companies. It's the back end control of these companies to shift into whatever agenda that they are, whatever agenda they want. And they do this through things like this scoring system. And it's literally funny. Like, it's not funny at all. But if you look, they can, because it's unregulated, they can change what percentages and weights go towards different things. So like the example was like McDonald's was a little bit lower in the rank because their environmental score, like 5% of their environmental score was based off of carbon emissions. And they had a lower score because they transport meat all over the world. And that uses a lot of fuel and all that stuff. But something came out and they changed the score and they took that 5% related to carbon emissions and said, nope, we're going to count that as a 0% now. And we're going to focus more on that 5% of doing like environmental friendly initiatives related to like putting recycle bins like in the stores or whatever like that. And they shifted that. They just changed the scoring system.
Yeah.
So that was ignored. And then you still have the perception, oh, McDonald's is doing all these good things. And, they had a low score and now they've moved up. Like they've moved up the ranking. It's because they literally changed the rules. You changed the score sheet, which you can't do as easily in the credit rating like system that we were talking about before. And this is how they make money. This is how, just like they talk about the social credit score for us, like that's coming out and they're, incorporating it into our credit scores, is they get to decide what those factors are and how to define the factors to give you that score. So they changed the score on this ESG, meaning McDonald's now has a better chance at lower interest rates, more investments, easier to get loans, all these things, versus another company that they don't like or is not following the agenda they have. They can force these things on so that companies won't invest in them.
I did see an interview. I'm not exactly sure how old it was, but it's a glimmer of hope with the former CIO, Chief Investment Officer of BlackRock.
Yep.
And he is kind of being a whistleblower, I guess you could say, to say that, and I saw this was like on CNBC or something. This is a person who truly believed in the ESG. This is going to make an impact, a positive impact on the world. This is going to force companies to be more environmentally friendly, more socially conscious, all of that. And now he's obviously someone with half a brain to be, or not half a brain, but half a moral compass to say, okay, this isn't actually making a change, which, by the way, it never was intended to, but he, I guess, didn't realize that. But it's not actually making companies have you know, a more of a focus on doing things that are good for the environment. So we have this kind of ambiguous scoring, which, as you're saying, they literally can change it on a whim. And they were supposed to be using that to like as kind of a carrot on a stick for companies to be able to say, oh, well, we're going to get more investors if we have this high ESG score. And so now they just have found loopholes and ways to get the high ESG score without actually having to make positive changes. Yep. And so they're getting the investors. And so it's just the same as it always was, except for worse, because now it's this agenda of the people that rule the world that want to push it. So
yeah, and CEI, right? CEI. And CEI is started by the, the Human Rights Group or Human... It's the one, if you drive around, you see people with that equal sign, the blue square with the equal sign, that's a lobbying organization. So think politics and money to senators and congressmen to drive policy. That's a huge lobby.
LGBT whatever.
It is all about LGBTQ IAQ whatever plus. And that is a portion of that ESG score. That social portion is CEI kind of plugs into that. So they go through, same thing. They have a scoring system very specific to LGBTQ and like that you can go on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
and
you
like,
can literally look it up and read about it.
Yeah, you can see this. You get 10 points for this. You get 25 points for this. You get negative 25 points for this about like having different bathrooms and like where they invest money. And part of it, they don't explicitly call it out, but like you basically can't invest in anything that could potentially be against LGBTQ folks. So like any Christian organizations or anything like that. Again, it doesn't say that explicitly. It doesn't say Christian explicitly, but you would get docked for that. And you can see all these companies, their rankings and all that. And again, if they have a higher CEI score, that's going to play higher into the ESG score, which means they get more investors.
And it's interesting. I don't know the answer to this, but it's strictly an American thing, right? Because they don't have these agendas in other countries. You know, like every year in June, you see the comparison of every U.S. Twitter account changes to their rainbow, and then those same companies on their Middle East account, they just keep the plain logo. So it's just all virtue signaling. But I mean, the companies like, I don't know why Mercedes-Benz is coming to mind. So Mercedes-Benz is a company that is worldwide. So how do they push this ESG elsewhere, or is all the money just coming from American investors? Or I'm not sure exactly how it all ties in globally, but
yeah, I mean, different companies trade on different stock exchanges. I don't know if Volkswagen's a German company, so I don't know if it's on the European exchanges. But I honestly don't know the ESG if it's just American or if there's other social scores out there in other countries and other global portions and what that looks like. But
I think they already have more. They have more government control literally everywhere else in the world other than America already.
Yep.
So that's why it's the biggest, push here. They're trying to.
So why care about this and why does this matter? Like, it's just unveiling the curtain a little bit to what's going on in the background. Like, how does this work? Like, why are people doing this? Like, how does this money, why is Ford putting a pride thing on a Ranger truck or whatever it is, a Raptor truck? It's like, that just doesn't make sense.
Not their customer base.
But they're not trying to.
They don't care about their customer base.
Yeah, they need their pension funds, those insurance companies, like the big money to be part of their stock.
And that's why the only way that we could, quote unquote, defeat these things is if we all just collectively boycotted these stores, which just is not going to happen. So it's kind of hopeless, but
well, I mean, I think
not hopeless overall, but in the sense of like turning this around, it's a little bit hopeless.
I think when people actually do band together and do actually make a significant statement against something, you do see things start to happen, because when it's big enough, and ultimately this is about money, right? So if there is enough where profits start decreasing significantly, then they have to react because they need money. Like if it's a blip and they can keep going, it's not a big deal. But if there's a big enough impact, they have to do something. Like Starbucks they pulled all their Pride merchandise and stuff out of their store. So I don't think it's hopeless. I think you can make an impact. The problem is it takes a massive amount of effort and group think to try to get there. And like Wall Street Bets, like this is going back now years ago with Bed Bath & Beyond and GameStop. So these were companies that hedge funds basically shorted to death. Like there's a strategy where hedge funds basically run companies into the ground, and they saw a group of investors saw an opportunity to basically squeeze these hedge funds. If everybody all at once, like retail investors, all of us could buy these, at the time, basically penny stocks, you could force the hedge funds, because they're going to start taking losses, to sell their positions, and it's going to make these stocks go way up again. So you like fight.
I remember
against
when
the
that
machine.
happened with GameStop.
So you can fight against it when it's a collective group, but trying to get everyone in a large enough fashion to go against massive money is hard.
And it has to be for an extended amount of time too.
That's
like
the problem.
Like the Bud Light thing, like I don't know, are they permanently, a damaged brand now, or will people eventually just be like, well, I really do want a Bud Light? I mean, definitely not me, but just thinking like, okay, we're at Disney, they're selling Bud Light. So that's like the corporations are all in bed with each other. So as long as they're still supporting each other, our support only means so much, so like what would it take for Disney to stop stocking Bud Light as the beer? Like literally no one would have to buy it for a very long time for that to trickle down into the people that place the orders with the companies, for them to then say, and there's probably all sorts of
contracts,
handshakes and contracts and everything in there. So it's like very daunting, but we all have to try to do the best and do what we feel is right for ourselves in the moment in time. But I think just being aware that, of why all this is happening is important.
Yep. Pulling back the curtain a little bit.
And the latest thing is the Oscars. Like, this is an example of they're blatantly trying to increase their CEI score. Once you know what it is, the requirements, you can so easily spot it. So now the Oscars is coming out, and like, who even cares about these award shows anyways?
I know. I can't believe. I mean, I never cared my whole life about these things, but it's like, why do people watch these?
Well, and over the last couple of years, it had like their ratings or their viewership is literally hardly anything, and yet they're still having it. So that's like an example of what I'm saying. Like, they're gonna it's an institution. It's going to happen. But they're literally changing to even be nominated, to even be an Oscar nominee. You have to have, the film has to have in the lead role either a woman, person of color, or, LGBTQ type person. Literally has to be the main character. So it's hilarious that they consider this diversity and inclusion, because you're forcing to exclude certain types of people, which is white males, straight white males, literally the only people that don't fall into one of those categories. You're purposely excluding them from being the lead role in a film to be Oscar nominated. So how is that diverse and inclusive? It's literally the opposite. So it's so funny. But yeah, stop supporting Hollywood for sure. And after going to the movies,
it's ridiculous.
No desire to return.
No, definitely not.
Next thing we wanted to touch on was the Joe Rogan podcast. Again, if you're in our world and everyone was sharing it, talking about it. He had Robert Kennedy Jr. on, right? Am I saying the name right?
Yeah.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Until it's a tongue twister. Had him on the podcast, and Joe Rogan's podcasts are always like 3 hours, super long. I'm still only halfway through it, but already just everything that's covered. I mean, really have to hand it to Joe Rogan for giving a platform to all these people. He gives a platform to all kinds.
He does.
Which is what we need, honestly. We need to hear from people on both sides of the coin. But he specifically said at the start of the interview, like, I don't want to interrupt you. I want to just let you have this platform to speak. And so the first hour is just discussing basically jabs and all the history of that and going in depth into that. And, I think people, including ourselves a few years ago, you knew that he's one of the original anti-vaxxers and just like, oh, whatever, write him off. If you listen to him talk, listen to literally 10 minutes, the man knows what he's talking about. You can't deny that. He knows every date, every name, every study the numbers. Like, he's been in this game for so long. You just can't deny that he knows what he's talking about. And so all the labels that they want to put on him is just to, deter people from actually listening to what he has to say.
I'm scared for him. He's speaking out against, massive pharmaceutical companies and stuff. And his family does not have a good track record of, literally government stepping in. Like, I don't know how people aren't talking about the CIA was part of killing JFK.
I think he talks about that in this podcast. I just haven't gotten to that yet.
Well, interestingly enough, too, I saw a reel today about finance, like campaign finance and stuff, and how JFK's, it was, his campaign, I don't know, 20 million or whatever. It was like a lot of millions, and 50% of that was put up by JFK, and then 50% was fundraised and all of that. And then Ronald Reagan was like 9.7% of his money was put up, and the rest was, somebody else. Trump was 72% of his money, and the rest was, others. The Hillary campaign and the Biden campaign, zero. None of their money was put up. It was all special interest groups, which makes total sense. And the Clintons they could totally afford to run a campaign.
Yeah.
But by influence of super PACs and all of the corruption, like basically you're buying politicians through BlackRock, pharmaceutical companies, all sorts of lobbying groups. Yeah.
Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'm sure, was in
but
there
anyway,
for the Clintons.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy, I think, is a grassroots thing too. So I would not be surprised if he's put up, at least what he can.
Yeah.
For his
I have no
campaign.
idea. Well, some of the other things he's talking about on the podcast are the pesticides, glyphosate and atrazine. He talks about, the study that shows that atrazine, which is in all of our drinking water and everything, turns the male frogs female. Like, not just, it was like 40 frogs in the study, male frogs. 30 of them were chemically castrated, and of that, 34 of them literally started producing eggs. They literally turned
And you
female.
said as a percentage that the amount of atrazine they gave him was less than what we're exposed to, right? And atrazine, it's a pesticide.
Less than
or
what's
herbicide?
Considered safe for human consumption.
Is it a pesticide or herbicide? It's one of the most widely.
It's a pesticide.
Yeah, worldwide, one of the largest pesticides used.
So that answers some questions too.
100%. You think about why is this happening? Why were there really this many LGBTQ people out there and all this time and just suppress? No.
Yeah, I still don't understand the people who deny the social contagion aspect of it.
Oh, for sure. Oh, and parents with their kids, they just want the social media grab.
Even with anxiety. I feel like I experienced a little bit of social contagion. And again, it's there was some part of me that had, true anxiety. And then you just, every social media post, because you know how social media is. Once you start looking at a topic, then that's all it shows you. Diagnosing, if you have these things and you're a high functioning, anxiety person, whatever. Yeah. Well, who knows what they want to push to some people. It's scary. Yeah. But I, that's getting off on a rabbit hole, but it's crazy.
Yeah.
And then some of the other things that he talked about on the podcast was Wi-Fi and the dangers of Wi-Fi. And Joe Rogan had no idea. He had never even heard that Wi-Fi is dangerous to us. And it is. And now we're going down that path. So that'll probably be an episode coming up about how to hardwire your house and test for EMFs and all that. Because it's a little scary.
You get a meter. I have the meter that a lot of folks use, and you walk closer and closer to your Wi-Fi router, and it's in the levels of where it comes with a little card that shows you different levels and what you should do. And there's one category that's practically run away. You should not be ever spending any sort of time close to this thing, and it's buzzing way off the charts when you get close to the Wi-Fi router. And it's oh geez.
Yeah, a while ago we started turning ours off at night. Just put the router on a timer so that you don't even have to think about it.
One of those $5 timers.
Yeah.
A little crank one time.
So I'm glad that we at least have been doing that. And it's literally impossible to completely avoid Wi-Fi in this day and age. So that's why at night it's important, because you're giving your body, consecutive number of hours to repair the damage that is caused by that. But anyways, the point is, go listen to that podcast. It's like episode 1999. So it's really, really good. I hope that it's like his most listened to episode ever.
Yeah, I hope so.
But
I always wonder about like Joe Rogan, like, my goodness, he hears so many different varying opinions and different like facts and all that. Like, can you imagine, like, I don't know, going to bed or like just thinking about like every day, like the amount you're learning through this is just like, whoa.
That is crazy.
And like discerning what's right and what's wrong.
Well, I actually really should need to look into like who owns Spotify, because I mean, bravo to Spotify. They kicked off Harry and Meghan's podcast from the platform.
Wow.
Like Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. They kicked them off the platform, but they have never, wavered in supporting Joe Rogan and like keeping his podcast running. So
they've got him now. Like, you can't. Like,
well, I mean, does anything on Spotify even matter other than Joe Rogan? Yeah. We're on Spotify.
That's right.
We're carrying a large percent for them, like, for sure. Shout out to our Spotify listeners. So the last topic is the most current of the moment, which is the Ocean Gate submersible.
It's called Ocean Gate?
Yeah.
It's funny because that's like what all the like conspiracy things are called.
I know.
Yeah.
So what does that make you think?
Yeah.
So there's a lot out there with that. Today, I forget if it was like today or yesterday, but they just finally announced that, it must have imploded and all of the 5 members were killed instantly, which is really sad and, devastating for those families. Plenty of people believe that they were not on it. They are now living somewhere else with new identities, and this was all just a Ocean Gate, all of a scheme. Couldn't
we all use a little Ocean Gate?
Well, there's also like a different train of conspiracy theory of, I don't know how many people know about the Titanic, but the Titanic was not an accidental, oh no, we hit this iceberg and now we're going down. It was very intentional and had to do with the creation of the Federal Reserve. So all of the people that were on board not all the people, but the main players that were on the Titanic were against the Federal Reserve. And some of the people, including like JP Morgan, he was a huge proponent of the Federal Reserve, and he had a ticket to be on Titanic, and at the last minute he didn't go on. So people are saying like, oh, like, who were these men? I guess the Fed Now thing is coming out really soon, and so like, were they players in that? Yeah, were they opposing it, and so they got offed in some way? I don't sick, like, I don't really see how they would be able to pull that off.
Yeah,
like, unless the guy leading the tour, I guess, was in on it and willing to sacrifice his life to, off these other people. But I just don't think that is right, because I mean, it included a 19-year-old son of one of the men. Like, why would you want to do that to somebody's kid? Doesn't make any sense. So I think people they were going to the ruins of the Titanic, so the people are drawing those lines. I don't think it's that personally, but no matter what, let's just take it at face value. It's very sad if they are deceased, and sad for their families. But what is actually factual and horrible is that apparently on Sunday, which is 5 days ago now, is when they actually knew, the Biden administration actually knew that this implosion had occurred, and they dragged it out all week. All anybody can talk about, every single news media outlet, every high-ranking social media person is talking about this Ocean Gate. And then finally, and also what happens to be going on this whole week is Hunter Biden's finally getting in trouble for his federal crimes. And, I don't know, he's like indicted today, or something big happened today. And so that's when they released that, the news that the submersible was imploded. And so it's like a huge distraction, which I had no idea any of those details or whatever. But from day one, this is where you have to turn your brains on, guys. From day one, you see all of a sudden, everyone everywhere is talking about the same thing, you need to turn around and look the other direction to see what else is going on. There just isn't anything that just naturally, literally everyone is talking about. It's
Yes.
It happens, like, it's planned, it's manufactured. So those are all the topics that we had for today. And then I guess a little announcement, or it's not like an exciting announcement, but we are going to be kind of pulling back from our weekly posting schedule here. We want to just make sure that we're continuing to bring you guys really high quality episodes and, you know, covering topics that are important to us and giving ourselves enough time to do the proper research before talking with you all about them. So we've also got some other projects that we're going to be working on that we're really excited about, and we just need the time. Like, we literally do not have a lot of time. And so not only do we spend the time to film these episodes, but it takes a lot to edit them, you know, put them up on all the different platforms and all the behind the scenes stuff. I'm sure you guys can understand, but yeah, we don't have a set schedule, I guess, that we're going to follow. It's just going to kind of be when there's a good episode to be had. So
just be sure to follow us on our socials, and we'll post as soon as they're up, and keep an eye out for them. But we appreciate all of you, and thank you for listening and liking and subscribing and leaving us comments, and we've really appreciated it. And we'll be here to talk more craziness soon.
Yep. So
right.
See you next time.
Bye.